Dr. Amelia Johnson had always loved her evening walks. After spending long days at the university teaching constitutional law and working on cases at her law firm, these quiet moments were her escape. Tonight was no different. She stepped out of her beautiful two-story home on Riverside Avenue, pulled her earbuds in, and started her usual route through the neighborhood she'd recently moved into. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Amelia smiled as she walked past the well-kept houses with their perfect lawns and expensive cars parked in driveways. 6 months ago, she never imagined she'd be living in a place like this. Growing up in a small apartment with her single mother, dreaming of a house like these seemed impossible. But here she was at 34, living her dream. She pulled out her phone and called her mother, something she did during most of her walks. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice cheerful as she strolled down the sidewalk. "Baby girl, how was your day?" Her mother's warm voice came through the earbuds. "Incredible, actually. Remember I told you about that promotion they were considering me for? Well, I got it. I'm now the head of the Constitutional Law Department." Her mother's excited squeal made Amelia laugh. "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. Your father would be so proud, too." From that little girl who used to argue with everyone about fairness to running a whole department at the university, Amelia's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. She'd worked so hard to get here, scholarships through college, working 3 jobs during law school, staying up late studying while her classmates went to parties. Every sacrifice had been worth it for moments like this. The best part is the raise that comes with it, Amelia continued, stepping around a small puddle from the afternoon's brief rain shower. "I can finally start paying you back for all those years you supported my dreams. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. Seeing you succeed is payment enough." As they chatted about family news and Amelia's plans for her new position, she barely noticed the police car that slowly drove past her going in the opposite direction. She was too caught up in telling her mother about the new community outreach program she wanted to start, bringing legal education to underserved neighborhoods. "You know what I'm thinking, Mom? I want to create a program where law students go into high schools and teach kids about their rights. So many young people don't know what they're entitled to under the law." "That sounds wonderful, baby. You've always wanted to help people." Amelia turned the corner onto Maple Street, admiring the large oak trees that lined the sidewalk. Their branches created a natural canopy overhead, and she loved how peaceful it felt. This was exactly why she'd chosen this neighborhood. After years of living in noisy apartments near the university, the quiet suburban streets felt like paradise. That's when she noticed the police car again. It was driving slowly behind her, matching her walking pace. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police patrolled neighborhoods all the time, especially nice ones like this. But something felt off about how slowly the car was moving. "Mom, let me call you back in a few minutes," she said, though she kept the earbuds in. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just want to pay attention to where I'm walking. It's getting a bit darker out here." Amelia continued walking, but now she was more aware of her surroundings. The police car was definitely following her. When she crossed the street, it followed. When she turned down another street, it turned too. Her chest started to tighten with anxiety. She'd heard stories from friends about being followed by police for no reason, but it had never happened to her. Maybe because she spent most of her time on the university campus or in professional settings, she'd been sheltered from these experiences. But now, walking through her own neighborhood in her workout clothes, she was just another black woman on the street. Amelia tried to stay calm and think logically. Maybe there had been some crime in the area, and they were just being cautious. Maybe they were looking for someone specific and she happened to fit a description. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, but as the car continued to follow her, maintaining that unnaturally slow pace, her heart started beating faster. She thought about her conversation with her mother just minutes before, how proud they both were of how far she'd come. She thought about the constitutional rights she taught her students about every day. She thought about the cases she'd won defending people against unlawful police actions. Yet here she was, feeling small and vulnerable on the street where she lived. Amelia decided to test her theory. She deliberately took a longer route, turning left when she normally would turn right, taking a path that would lead her in a circle back toward her house. The police car followed every turn. There was no doubt now that she was being deliberately tracked. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Call me when you get home safe, baby." If only her mother knew what was happening right now. Amelia had always been careful not to worry her mother too much about the challenges she faced as a black professional. Her mother had enough stress in her own life without worrying about her daughter's safety during simple activities like walking through her own neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, someone who had dedicated her career to understanding and defending constitutional rights, being treated like a suspect for the crime of existing in her own neighborhood. She taught her students about the Fourth Amendment, about probable cause, about the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. She'd argued cases in court about these very issues, but knowing your rights and having them respected were two very different things. As she continued walking, Amelia's mind raced through her options. She could call the police department and file a complaint, but what would she say? That a police car was driving through her neighborhood? They hadn't done anything illegal yet. She could try to lose them by going to a friend's house, but that felt like running from a problem that shouldn't exist in the first place. Most of all, she was angry. Angry that her peaceful evening walk had been ruined. Angry that she now felt unsafe in the neighborhood she'd worked so hard to afford. Angry that despite all her education, all her professional success, all her contributions to society, she was still being treated with suspicion simply because of the color of her skin. The police car's headlights were getting brighter in the growing darkness, and Amelia knew that whatever was about to happen, her quiet evening was about to become something much more complicated. The police car's red and blue lights suddenly flashed on, breaking the peaceful evening silence. Amelia's heart jumped into her throat as the cruiser pulled up beside her and stopped. She had been hoping that maybe, just maybe, the officers would keep driving and leave her alone. But now there was no denying what was happening. 2 officers got out of the car. The first one was older, probably in his 40s, with graying hair and a thick build. His name tag read Officer Davis. The second officer was younger, maybe late 20s, with nervous energy about her. Her tag said, Officer Rodriguez. Officer Davis walked toward Amelia with his shoulders squared and his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. His whole body language screamed authority and aggression. Officer Rodriguez hung back slightly, watching but not saying anything. Hold it right there, Davis called out in a commanding voice that echoed down the quiet street. We need to talk to you. Amelia stopped walking and turned to face them, her hands visible at her sides. Her years of legal training kicked in, and she forced herself to stay calm despite her racing heart. She knew that how she handled the next few minutes could determine whether this situation escalated or stayed manageable. Good evening, officers, she said politely. Is there something I can help you with? Davis approached closer, studying her face and looking her up and down like she was a suspect in a lineup. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this neighborhood. Someone matching your description has been seen casing houses. Amelia blinked in surprise. Casing houses? She'd been walking the same route for months, talking to her mother on the phone. There was nothing suspicious about her behavior unless walking while black counted as suspicious. I think there's been a misunderstanding, officer, she said, keeping her voice steady and respectful. I live in this neighborhood. I was just taking my evening walk. I do this same route almost every day. Officer Davis's eyes narrowed. You live here?
In this neighborhood?
His tone suggested he found this hard to believe. Yes, sir. I live on Riverside Avenue, just 2 blocks from here. I can show you my identification if you'd like. Instead of asking for her ID, Davis took another step closer, invading her personal space. What were you doing on your phone? Who were you talking to? I was talking to my mother, Amelia replied, confused by the question. Is that against the law? Don't get smart with me, Davis snapped. We know criminals use phones to coordinate their activities. Were you telling someone which houses looked empty? Which ones had nice cars in the driveway? Amelia couldn't believe what she was hearing. The conversation she'd just had with her mother about her promotion, about their family, about her community outreach ideas. Somehow this officer was twisting it into something criminal. Officer, I really think there's been a mistake, she said, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. I'm a law professor at the university. I live here. I pay taxes here. I'm not doing anything wrong. Davis laughed, but there was no humor in it. A law professor? Right, and I'm the mayor. Look, lady, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know a suspicious person when I see one. Officer Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably behind her partner, but still didn't speak up. Amelia noticed that the younger officer looked uneasy about how this was going, but she seemed afraid to challenge her senior partner. "What exactly am I suspected of doing?" Amelia asked, drawing on her legal knowledge. "What crime do you think I've committed? Are you carrying any weapons?" Davis demanded, ignoring her question. "Any drugs? Do you have anything in your pockets that could hurt me?" "No, sir. I don't have any weapons or drugs. I'm just out for a walk." "Put your hands where I can see them," Davis ordered. "And don't move." Amelia slowly raised her hands, palms facing the officers. She was acutely aware that people in nearby houses were starting to notice the commotion. A few had come out onto their porches, and she could see some filming with their phones. Part of her was embarrassed to be the center of this scene, but another part was grateful that there would be witnesses to whatever happened next. "Now, I'm going to need you to answer some questions," Davis continued. "How long have you been in this neighborhood tonight? What route did you take? Have you been looking into cars? Have you tried any door handles?" Each question felt more ridiculous than the last. Amelia realized that no matter how she answered, Davis was determined to treat her like a criminal. She thought about all the cases she'd studied in law school about police overreach, about the importance of probable cause, about the rights of citizens to be free from harassment. "Officer, with all due respect, I don't believe you have reasonable suspicion to detain me," she said calmly. "I haven't committed any crime. I'm walking on a public sidewalk in the neighborhood where I live. Unless you're arresting me for something specific, I'd like to continue on my way home." Davis's face reddened. "Oh, so now you're a lawyer too? First you're a professor, now you're a lawyer. Your story keeps changing." "I'm both," Amelia said. "I teach constitutional law and I practice civil rights law. And right now you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights." "Your rights?" Davis stepped even closer, his voice rising. "Let me tell you about rights. I have the right to protect this neighborhood from people who don't belong here. I have the right to investigate suspicious activity. And right now you're acting pretty suspicious." Officer Rodriguez finally spoke up, her voice quiet. "Davis, maybe we should just check her ID and—" "I'll handle this, Rodriguez." Davis cut her off sharply. "You're new here. Let me show you how we deal with troublemakers." Amelia felt a chill at being called a troublemaker. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't been rude, hadn't done anything except assert her legal rights. But somehow that made her a troublemaker in this officer's eyes. "Sir, I'm happy to show you my identification," she offered again. "It will prove that I live here and that I'm exactly who I say I am." "Oh, now you want to cooperate?" Davis said sarcastically. "After giving me attitude and talking about your rights?" He pulled out his radio and called for backup. "This is Unit 47. I've got a suspicious person on Maple Street who's being uncooperative. Requesting backup for officer safety." Amelia's heart sank as she heard him describe her as uncooperative. She'd been nothing but polite and respectful, even as he'd treated her with hostility and suspicion. But she knew that his version of events would go into the official record, not hers. As they waited for backup to arrive, more neighbors gathered to watch. Some looked concerned about her, while others seemed to believe that where there was smoke, there must be fire, that the police wouldn't stop someone without good reason. Amelia thought about calling someone, maybe a colleague from the law school, maybe a friend who was an attorney. But she was afraid that reaching for her phone would be seen as a threatening move. She thought about her mother, probably wondering why she hadn't called back yet. She thought about all the clients she'd represented who had told her similar stories, and how she'd listened with sympathy, but perhaps not fully understood the fear and humiliation they'd felt. Now she understood completely. Officer Davis was staring at her with obvious suspicion, as if waiting for her to make some move that would justify his treatment of her. Officer Rodriguez kept glancing between her partner and Amelia, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. And Amelia stood there, hands still raised in her own neighborhood, waiting to see how much worse this was going to get. The backup car arrived within minutes, adding 2 more officers to the scene. Now Amelia was surrounded by 4 police officers on the quiet residential street, all because she had been walking home from her evening exercise. The situation felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. Officer Davis seemed energized by the arrival of his colleagues. "This is the suspicious person I called about," he announced to the new officers. "Claims she lives in the neighborhood, but she's been evasive and uncooperative." One of the backup officers, a tall man with a stern face, looked Amelia up and down. "What's the situation here?" "She matches the description from those break-in reports we got last week," Davis said. And when I tried to question her, she started getting hostile, talking about her rights and claiming to be some kind of lawyer. Amelia felt her stomach drop. She realized that Davis was building a narrative that painted her as a criminal, and him as just doing his job. Every word she'd spoken in her own defense was being twisted into evidence of guilt. "Officers, please," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding. I'm Dr. Amelia Johnson. I teach at the university. I live at 847 Riverside Avenue. If you'll just let me show you my identification, this can all be cleared up in 30 seconds. But Davis wasn't interested in clearing anything up. "Empty your pockets," he demanded. "All of them, slowly." "What am I suspected of having done?" Amelia asked again. "What crime do you think I've committed that gives you the right to search me?" "You want to know what crime?" Davis's voice was getting louder, more aggressive. "How about trespassing? How about casing houses for burglary? How about interfering with a police investigation?" "But I haven't done any of those things," Amelia protested. "I'm walking on a public sidewalk in my own neighborhood. That's not illegal." The backup officers were watching this exchange with interest. Officer Rodriguez still looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot and avoiding eye contact. But the others seemed to be buying into Davis's version of events. "You know what I think?" Davis continued, stepping closer to Amelia. "I think you're exactly the type of person who's been causing problems in this neighborhood. You people come in here thinking you can do whatever you want, but we're here to protect the decent folks who actually belong here." The racial undertone in his words was unmistakable. You people. The implication that she didn't belong in this neighborhood despite living there. Amelia felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew that any show of emotion would be used against her. "Officer, I pay property taxes on my home just like everyone else in this neighborhood," she said quietly. "I have every right to be here." "Property taxes?" Davis laughed mockingly. "Right. And how exactly does someone like you afford a house in a neighborhood like this? What kind of work do you really do?" The question was loaded with implications. How does someone like you, a black woman, afford to live in this expensive, predominantly white neighborhood? The assumption was clear. She must be involved in something illegal. "I'm a tenured professor and a practicing attorney," Amelia repeated. "I worked very hard to be able to afford my home here." "Sure you are," Davis said with a smirk. "And I bet you have all the paperwork to prove it, right? Probably fake IDs, fake documents, the whole setup." Officer Rodriguez finally spoke up again, her voice tentative. "Davis, why don't we just look at her identification?" "If she really lives here—" "Rodriguez, I told you I'll handle this," Davis snapped. "You're too soft. This is how criminals operate. They have a sob story for everything. They always claim to be something they're not." He turned back to Amelia. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put your hands behind your back, and we're going to search you properly. And if we find anything at all that you shouldn't have, you're going downtown." "On what charges?" Amelia asked. "You still haven't told me what law you think I've broken. How about resisting arrest?" Davis said with a cold smile. "How about disorderly conduct? How about obstruction of justice? I can think of plenty of charges that would stick." Amelia realized with growing horror that Davis was essentially threatening to arrest her on false charges unless she submitted to whatever he wanted to do. This was exactly the kind of police abuse she'd spent her career fighting against, but experiencing it firsthand was completely different from reading about it in case. "E-files. I'm not resisting arrest," she said carefully. "I'm not being disorderly. I'm asking legitimate questions about why I'm being detained." "Turn around," Davis ordered. "Hands behind your back. Am I under arrest?" Amelia asked. "You will be if you don't cooperate." It was a catch-22. If she submitted to the search, she was allowing her rights to be violated. If she refused, Davis would arrest her on trumped-up charges. Either way, she lost. More neighbors had gathered now, forming a small crowd on the sidewalk across the street. Some were recording with their phones, which gave Amelia a small measure of comfort. At least there would be evidence of what really happened here. Among the neighbors, she recognized Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down. They'd chatted several times when Mrs. Chen was gardening. Surely she would recognize Amelia and confirm that she lived in the neighborhood, but Mrs. Chen just stood there watching, apparently unwilling to get involved. "I'm going to count to 3, Davis said. 1, 2, wait," Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Davis, look, there are a lot of people watching. Maybe we should just..." Maybe you should mind your own business and let me do my job. Davis cut her off again. But the younger officer had planted a seed of doubt. The backup officers were glancing around at all the phones pointed in their direction. In today's world, they knew that videos of police encounters could go viral in hours and end careers in days. "You know what?" said one of the backup officers, a shorter man with a mustache. "Why don't we just see some ID? Keep this simple." Davis looked annoyed that his colleagues weren't backing him up completely, but he nodded grudgingly. "Fine, but I want to see everything. Driver's license, credit cards, anything else she's got." Amelia slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet. Her hands were shaking slightly, both from fear and from anger. She handed her driver's license to Officer Rodriguez, who seemed like the most reasonable of the group. Rodriguez looked at the license, and her eyebrows raised in surprise. "It says she lives at 847 Riverside Avenue. That's just 2 blocks from here." She showed the license to Davis, who snatched it from her hand and studied it suspiciously, as if looking for signs that it was fake. "Address on the license doesn't prove anything," he said. "People can put any address they want on fake documents." But some of the wind had gone out of his sails. The backup officers were exchanging glances, and Officer Rodriguez was looking more confident about speaking up. "Davis," she said quietly, "maybe we should just let her go home. She's got ID showing she lives in the neighborhood. She hasn't actually done anything wrong." "She's been acting suspicious," Davis insisted, "and she was uncooperative when I tried to question her." "I was asking about my rights," Amelia said. "That's not being uncooperative. That's being a citizen who knows the law." The crowd of neighbors was getting larger, and more phones were recording. Amelia could see that some of the officers were getting nervous about the attention. This was clearly not how they'd planned to spend their evening, but Davis wasn't ready to give up. He was too invested in his version of events, too committed to proving that he'd been right to stop her in the first place. "I don't care what her ID says," he declared. "I'm not satisfied with her story. There's something she's not telling us." Just as Officer Davis was reaching for his handcuffs, declaring that he was going to arrest Amelia for obstruction of justice, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the scene. The car moved with authority, and all the officers turned to see who was arriving. Out of the driver's seat stepped a woman in her 50s wearing a crisp police uniform with captain's bars on her shoulders. Captain Lisa Thompson had been driving home from a late meeting at headquarters when she noticed the cluster of police cars and the crowd of neighbors. Something about the scene didn't look right, so she decided to stop and investigate. Captain Thompson was known throughout the department as a no-nonsense leader who demanded professionalism from her officers. She'd worked her way up through the ranks over 25 years, and she had zero tolerance for officers who brought shame to the badge. "What's going on here?" she asked in a firm voice that immediately commanded attention. Officer Davis straightened up, trying to look official and in control. "Captain, we responded to reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood. This individual was acting suspiciously and being uncooperative when we tried to question her." Captain Thompson looked around at the scene. 4 officers surrounding 1 woman. Neighbors recording with phones, the obvious tension in the air. Her experienced eye could tell that something was very wrong with this picture. "What specific suspicious activity?" she asked Davis. "Well, she was walking around the neighborhood, talking on her phone, looking at houses," Davis said, his confidence starting to waver under his captain's scrutiny. "Walking around and talking on the phone?" Captain Thompson repeated. "In what way is that suspicious?" "She matched the description from those break-in reports," Davis said quickly. "What description?" "Those reports said we were looking for a teenage male." Davis's face flushed red. He'd been caught in a lie, and everyone knew it. Captain Thompson turned to Amelia, her expression professional but not hostile. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Thompson. Can you tell me what happened here tonight?" Amelia took a deep breath, grateful to finally have someone in authority who seemed willing to listen. "Captain, I was taking my evening walk through my neighborhood, the same route I take almost every day. I was talking to my mother on the phone about my recent promotion at work. Officer Davis began following me in his patrol car, and when I noticed the car following me, I became concerned. Eventually, he stopped me and began questioning me aggressively, demanding to search me, threatening to arrest me. I've been completely cooperative, but he's treated me like a criminal for walking in my own neighborhood." "You live in this neighborhood?" Captain Thompson asked. "Yes, ma'am." 847 Riverside Avenue. I can show you my identification." Officer Rodriguez stepped forward and handed Captain Thompson Amelia's driver's license. The captain studied it carefully, then looked up at Amelia with the expression of growing recognition. "Dr. Johnson," she said slowly. "Dr. Amelia Johnson from the university?" Amelia nodded, surprised that the captain knew her name. Captain Thompson's expression changed completely. Her professional courtesy shifted to something closer to embarrassment and concern. "Dr. Johnson, weren't you at the police community relations meeting last month? The one where Chief Williams introduced you as our new consultant on constitutional law training?" The bottom fell out of Officer Davis's world. All the color drained from his face as he realized what was happening. "Yes, that's right," Amelia said. "I'm working with the department to develop new training programs on civil rights and constitutional law." Captain Thompson closed her eyes for a moment, as if processing the full magnitude of the situation. When she opened them, her gaze was steel as she looked at Officer Davis. "Let me understand this correctly. Officer Davis, you've been harassing Dr. Amelia Johnson, who is not only a respected member of this community and a professor at our local university, but who is also working directly with our department to improve police training and community relations." Davis opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Furthermore," Captain Thompson continued, her voice getting colder, "you've done this in front of multiple witnesses who are recording the entire encounter, and you've made statements that could reasonably be interpreted as racially motivated." The backup officers were now looking at Davis like he had the plague. Officer Rodriguez looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Everyone knew that this was going to be a career-ending incident. "Captain, I was just—" Davis started. "You were just what? Following proper procedure? Because I'm having trouble seeing how anything that happened here tonight follows any procedure we've ever taught." Captain Thompson turned back to Amelia, her expression sincere and apologetic. "Dr. Johnson, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about this incident. This is not how our department operates, and this is not how our officers are trained to treat members of the community." "I appreciate that, Captain," Amelia said, "but I have to say, this is exactly the kind of incident that makes our community relations work so necessary." "You're absolutely right," Captain Thompson agreed. "And I want you to know that this will be investigated thoroughly. There will be consequences." She turned to address all the officers present. "Dr. Johnson is free to go, obviously. Officer Davis, you will return to the station immediately and write a full report of tonight's events. Officer Rodriguez, you will also write a report. I want every detail documented." "Captain," Officer Rodriguez spoke up nervously. "I tried to suggest that we just check her ID earlier. But Officer Davis, we'll discuss your role in this later." "Rodriguez," Captain Thompson cut her off. "Right now I want everyone to clear this scene and let Dr. Johnson go home in peace." The backup officers quickly got into their car and drove away, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the disaster that Davis had created. Officer Rodriguez walked toward her patrol car, but Captain Thompson called her back. "Rodriguez, you'll ride with me back to the station. I want to talk to you about what happened here, and about your responsibilities when you witness misconduct." Officer Davis stood alone next to his patrol car, looking like a man whose world had just collapsed around him, which in many ways it had. Captain Thompson walked over to Amelia and spoke quietly. "Dr. Johnson, I know this was a traumatic experience, and I know an apology doesn't undo what happened. But I want you to know that we take this very seriously. Officer Davis will face disciplinary action up to and including termination." "I appreciate that, Captain," Amelia said. "But what concerns me most is that this kind of thing is happening to other people in our community who don't have my credentials or connections. People who might not be believed when they report it." "You're right," Captain Thompson nodded. "And that's exactly why your work with our department is so important. Maybe this incident, terrible as it is, can become a teaching moment that prevents future incidents." As the police cars finally drove away, leaving Amelia alone on the quiet street where this had all started, she felt a mix of emotions. Relief that it was over, anger that it had happened at all, and determination to make sure that her experience would lead to real change. The neighbors who had gathered to watch were slowly dispersing, many of them coming over to apologize for not speaking up sooner. Mrs. Chen approached with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Johnson, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I knew you lived here, but I was afraid to get involved." "It's okay, Mrs. Chen," Amelia said gently. "I understand why you were afraid. But as she finally walked the last 2 blocks to her house, Amelia knew that this night had changed something fundamental. She could never again take for granted the simple freedom of walking through her own neighborhood, and she was more determined than ever to use her position and her skills to fight against the kind of injustice she'd just experienced. The video footage from that night spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, clips of Officer Davis harassing Dr. Amelia Johnson were all over social media. Local news stations picked up the story by noon, and by evening it had reached national attention. The headlines wrote themselves: "Civil rights attorney racially profiled while walking in her own neighborhood," and "Police officer harasses law professor, hired to train his department." Amelia woke up to dozens of missed calls and text messages. Her phone had been buzzing all night with notifications from social media, news outlets wanting interviews, and colleagues expressing their support and outrage. Her mother called at 6 in the morning, having seen the story on the news. "Baby, are you okay? I saw what happened on television. I can't believe those officers treated you that way." "I'm okay, Mom," Amelia said, though she wasn't sure that was entirely true. She'd barely slept, replaying the events over and over in her mind. "I'm just trying to figure out what to do next." "What do you mean, what to do next?" "You sue them. You make them pay for what they did to you." Amelia had been thinking about exactly that. As a civil rights attorney, she knew she had grounds for a federal lawsuit under Section 1983 for violation of her constitutional rights. But she also knew that lawsuits were just one tool in the fight for justice. Real change required more than money-changing hands. Captain Thompson called her personally that morning to update her on the investigation. "Dr. Johnson, I wanted you to hear this from me directly. Officer Davis has been suspended without pay pending a full internal investigation. We're also referring his case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges." "What about Officer Rodriguez?" Amelia asked. "She's facing disciplinary action for failure to intervene when she witnessed clear misconduct. She'll be required to complete additional training and will be on probation for 6 months." "And the backup officers?" "They arrived after the initial harassment had begun, so their involvement was more limited. But they'll all be required to attend. The new training program that we're developing, the one you're helping us create, there, was irony in that Amelia would be training officers about the very rights that had been violated during her own encounter." By the end of the week, the pressure on the police department was enormous. The mayor called for reforms. The city council scheduled emergency hearings. Civil rights organizations demanded action, and Chief Williams found himself in the difficult position of defending his department while acknowledging that serious wrongs had been committed. Amelia decided to hold a press conference outside the courthouse. She'd thought carefully about what she wanted to say, knowing that her words would reach far beyond the local community. "What happened to me last Tuesday night was wrong," she told the crowd of reporters and supporters. "But what troubles me most is knowing that this kind of harassment happens to people in our community every day. People who don't have my education, my professional connections, or my knowledge of the legal system. People whose stories never make the news." She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Many were people of color who had experienced similar treatment. Others were white allies who were learning about these issues for the first time. "I could file a lawsuit and walk away," she continued. "But that wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Instead, I want to use this moment to push for real systemic change, not just in our police department, but in how we think about community safety and justice." The lawsuit, when it came, was comprehensive. Amelia's legal team filed federal charges against Officer Davis personally and against the police department for failing to properly train and supervise their officers. But they also proposed a detailed settlement that would require sweeping reforms. The negotiations took months, but eventually the city agreed to a settlement that went far beyond monetary damages. The agreement required the police department to implement new training programs on implicit bias and constitutional rights. It established an independent oversight board with real power to investigate complaints. It required body cameras for all patrol officers and changed the policies around when officers could stop and question citizens. Most importantly, it created a new community policing initiative that would assign officers to specific neighborhoods for extended periods, requiring them to build relationships with residents rather than just patrolling through. Officer Davis fought the charges against him, But the evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, the witness statements, and his own documented history of complaints made his case impossible to defend. He was eventually convicted of civil rights violations and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. He also lost his pension and was banned from ever working in law enforcement again. The case became a model for other cities dealing with similar issues. Amelia found herself traveling around the country, speaking at conferences and helping other communities develop their own reform programs. The incident that had started as a traumatic violation of her rights had become a catalyst for change on a much larger scale. 6 months after that night, Amelia was walking through her neighborhood again. But this time she wasn't alone. Officer Patricia King, one of the new community policing officers assigned to the area, was walking with her. Officer King was part of the new generation of police officers who had gone through the reformed training program. "Dr. Johnson, I wanted to thank you," Officer King said as they strolled down the same street where the incident had occurred. "The training program you developed has completely changed how I think about my hobby, sir. Instead of looking for suspicious behavior, I'm looking for ways to connect with the community." "That's exactly what we hoped for," Amelia replied. "How are the other officers responding to the changes?" "Some of them love it. They say it makes the job more rewarding when people see you as a helper instead of a threat. Others are having a harder time adjusting. Change is never easy." They stopped in front of Mrs. Chen's house where she was working in her garden. She looked up and smiled, waving at both women. "Dr. Johnson." "Officer King, how are you both doing?" It was a small moment, but it represented something bigger. A neighborhood where a police officer and a resident could walk together as partners in community safety. Where an elderly immigrant woman felt comfortable greeting both a law professor and a police officer with equal warmth. "You know what I've learned through all of this?" Amelia said to Officer King as they continued their walk. "Real change doesn't happen overnight. It happens one conversation at a time, one relationship at a time, one officer at a time." Officer King nodded. "My training sergeant told us that every interaction we have with the public is either building trust or breaking it down. There's no neutral." As they reached the corner where Officer Davis had first stopped Amelia that night, she felt a complex mix of emotions. The memory of that harassment would always be with her. But it had also led to something positive, real. Reforms that would protect other people from experiencing what she had gone through. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw your interview on the news tonight. Your father would be so proud of how you turned something terrible into something good." Amelia smiled, thinking about her father and all the people who had fought for civil rights before her. Each generation built on the work of the previous one, moving society forward inch by inch, case by case, reform by reform. The evening air was cool and peaceful as she and Officer King completed their walk. Children were playing in yards while their parents watched from porches. Neighbors were chatting over fences. It was the kind of scene that made a community feel safe and connected. "Same time next week?" Officer King asked as they reached Amelia's house. "Absolutely," Amelia replied. "We've got more work to do." As she walked up to her front door, Amelia reflected on how much had changed since that traumatic night. Officer Davis was in prison. The police department had been reformed. New relationships had been built between law enforcement and the community. And she had found a way to channel her anger and pain into meaningful action. It wasn't a perfect ending. There was still work to be done, still progress to be made. But it was proof that even in the darkest moments, it was possible to find a path toward justice and positive change. The porch light cast a warm glow as Amelia unlocked her door and stepped inside, ready to continue the fight for a more just society one day at a time.